The inscription gnōthi sεαυτόν, know thyself, carved into the pronaos of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, stands not as invitation, but as imperative, not counsel, but condition. It announces the foundational crisis of human consciousness, that the knower and the known collapse into a single locus, and that this collapse is not resolution, but commencement. The Delphic command does not suggest introspection. It demands confrontation with the metaphysical architecture of selfhood itself. This is not the self of autobiography, nor the self of psychological preference. It is the self as cosmological principle, the microcosmic reflection of macrocosmic order, the theatre in which the three worlds intersect, the crucible in which matter, psyche, and spirit wage their perpetual congress. To know this self is to recognize oneself as structure, not as story. The question emerged not in modernity, but in the mystery schools of Hermetic Alexandria, where Hellenistic philosophy, Judaic mysticism, and Egyptian sacerdotal wisdom converged. There the Delphic Maxim was understood not as moral instruction, but as the articulation of an ontological riddle. How can consciousness turn upon itself without infinite regress? How can the eye see itself except through reflection? And what mirror exists that does not distort? The Gnostic currents that flowed through late antiquity recognized in this maxim the doctrine of Gnosis, not knowledge as accumulation, but knowledge as recognition. The soul does not learn what it is, it remembers, and this remembering is not nostalgic but structural, a restoration of alignment between the trinal components of human existence, body, soul, and spirit, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshamah, salt, sulfur, and mercury. In Neoplatonic doctrine, the return to self-knowledge is inseparable from the return to the One. The soul, emanated through descending hierarchies of being, must retrace its path not through space, but through ontological density. The Plotinian ascent is not locomotion, but clarification, the progressive removal of accretions until the soul stands naked before its own essence. True transformation, then, is neither moral reformation nor emotional catharsis. It is structural reorientation. It is the reorganization of the interior cosmos according to principles that precede preference, transcend psychology, and align with the metaphysical order that governs manifestation itself. Trinosophy is not a system constructed, but a structure disclosed. It names what has always operated beneath the surface of consciousness, the threefold nature of all that is. This is not Trinitarian theology imported into philosophy, but the recognition that manifestation itself is trinal, that unity expresses through Trinity, and Trinity resolves into unity in an eternal respiration. The human being is not a unity, but a congress. Three fires burn within the single vessel. The body, Nefesh, the animal soul, salt, roots consciousness in matter, in the demands of hunger, fatigue, mortality. It is the weight that pulls awareness downward into the density of the manifest world. Without it, there is no incarnation. Without incarnation, there is no theatre for transformation. The soul, Ruach, the breath soul, sulfur, is the domain of passion, imagination, desire, and volition. It is the psyche, the mercurial middle realm where images form and dissolve, where the self constructs narratives, where emotion colors perception. This is the realm of becoming, of flux, of perpetual transformation without resolution. It is neither base nor exalted. It is the hinge. The spirit, Neshamah, the divine breath, Mercury, is the nous, the intellect that perceives universals, the capacity for direct apprehension of principle. It does not think about truth. It stands within it. It does not believe. It knows. But this knowledge is not personal. It is the impersonal light that illuminates the personal theatre. This trinal structure appears with remarkable consistency across the metaphysical traditions of the Mediterranean and Near East. In Hermetic texts, particularly the Corpus Hermeticum, the cosmogonic process unfolds through three principles: the divine mind, the demiurgic logos, and the material cosmos. The human being replicates this structure, containing within itself all three levels of reality. In Kabbalistic cosmology, the soul is not singular but composite. The Zohar describes the three levels, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshamah, as corresponding to three worlds: Asiya, action, Yetzirah, formation, and Bariah, creation. The ascent of consciousness is not the discovery of something new, but the activation of what was always latent, the awakening of higher aspects of the soul that were dormant during ordinary existence. In Neoplatonic emanation theory, the procession from the One unfolds through hypostases: the One, the intellect, the soul, and finally nature. The return, the epistrophe, reverses this descent. The soul must gather itself, withdrawing from dispersion in matter, consolidating in the realm of forms, and ultimately reuniting with the intellect that contemplates the One. Trinosophy does not synthesize these traditions. It recognizes that they are already describing the same structure from different linguistic and symbolic positions. The doctrine of the three is not invented, but disclosed through multiple apertures. The disposition of the adept, therefore, is neither belief nor skepticism, but structural perception. Silence is preferred over proclamation because the structure precedes language. Doubt is not weakness, but purification, the burning away of premature conclusions. Experience is subordinate to architecture because subjective states, however vivid, remain meaningless without the framework that interprets them. To enter Trinosophy is not to acquire a new philosophy, but to align with the order that governs consciousness itself. The movement of the soul through the worlds is not chosen. It is discovered already in motion. The soul does not decide to descend. It finds itself descended. The task is not initiation, but recognition, the realization that one has always been within the process, that the labyrinth is not entered, but inherited. The descent. The soul begins not in ignorance, but in innocence. It dwells within the structures it has inherited: cultural forms, linguistic conventions, moral axioms, religious symbols. These structures function as the exoskeleton of consciousness, providing shape and support. The self, at this stage, is largely constructed from external materials. Identity is performative, assembled from roles and expectations. This is not a pejorative condition. It is necessary. Without structure, consciousness cannot cohere. The child must learn language, ritual, custom. The adolescent must inhabit archetypes. The young adult must assume responsibility. These are the garments of the soul, and they are not illusions to be discarded, but forms to be outgrown. But the structures that enable early coherence eventually become constraints. What once provided orientation now produces dissonance. The inherited meanings no longer correspond to the lived texture of experience. The gap widens. The soul, pressing against the limits of its container, begins to sense the arbitrariness of its construction. This is the commencement of descent, not physical descent, but ontological. The soul begins to fall through the layers of its own edifice. What seemed solid reveals itself as provisional. What seemed eternal reveals itself as historical. What seemed necessary reveals itself as contingent. The descent accelerates. Moral certainties dissolve. Metaphysical assurances waver. The narratives that organized experience fragment. The soul, accustomed to the support of structure, suddenly finds itself in free fall. This is not depression, though it may coincide with depression. This is not crisis, though it precipitates crisis. This is the withdrawal of the ground. In alchemical terms, this is nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the reduction of form to prime matter. In Kabbalistic terms, this is descent into the qliphoth, the shells, the husks of abandoned structures. In psychological terms, this may appear as existential anxiety, derealization, the collapse of meaning, but these are reflections, not explanations. The metaphysical reality precedes the psychological expression, the confrontation. At the nadir of descent, the soul encounters not a monster, but a mirror. It confronts the fact of its own constructedness. It sees that what it called self was assemblage. What it called truth was consensus. What it called reality was interpretation. This confrontation is not theoretical, it is visceral, existential, totalizing. The soul cannot retreat into former certainties because those certainties have been revealed as fabrications. It cannot advance into new certainties because it now recognizes the mechanism by which certainties are produced. It stands suspended, neither here nor there in the liminal space between worlds. The temptation at this juncture is replacement, to exchange one system for another, one narrative for another, one identity for another. This is not transformation, but substitution. The structure of belief remains intact, only the content changes. The soul, desperate for ground, will grasp at any offered structure, but genuine confrontation requires something more difficult: suspension. The soul must remain in the abyss without constructing a bridge. It must endure the absence of structure without fleeing into premature synthesis. This is the desert, the wilderness, the dark night. This is where the soul learns that it can exist without the supports it believed essential. The confrontation is not with external forces, but with the interior mechanism of self-construction. The soul sees its own operations, how it selects, interprets, narrates, justifies, how it constructs coherence from chaos, how it projects unity onto multiplicity, how it generates the illusion of continuity from discontinuous moments. This seeing is not comfortable. It does not produce relief. It produces vertigo. The soul, observing itself observing, threatens to collapse into infinite regress. The mirror reflects the mirror reflecting the mirror. Who watches the watcher? In Jungian terms, this is the encounter with the shadow, not as moral darkness but as structural reality. The shadow is not the repository of repressed vice, but the recognition that the ego is an artifact, that the coherent self is a perpetually renewed fiction, that beneath the persona lies not a true self, but another persona, and beneath that another turtles all the way down. But Trinosophy does not terminate in psychological interpretation. The Jungian framework describes the phenomenology of the process, but not its metaphysical ground. The soul confronts not merely its own artifice, but the principle of artifice itself, the way consciousness necessarily structures experience, the way the trinal nature manifests through constructed forms. The reorientation, if the soul does not flee, if it does not replace, if it remains in suspension long enough, something shifts. Not because the soul achieves something, but because it stops attempting to achieve. Not because it resolves the paradox, but because it ceases demanding resolution. This is reorientation, not the construction of a new structure, but the recognition of a structure that precedes construction. The soul, having exhausted its strategies of self-preservation, becomes permeable to what was always present but obscured by effort. The trinal architecture, which had been theoretical, becomes operational. The soul recognizes itself not as a unity struggling for coherence, but as a congress already coherent. Body, soul, and spirit are not three things to be integrated, but three aspects of a single reality already integrated. The task is not to achieve unity, but to recognize the unity that precedes division. This recognition does not occur through intellectual comprehension. It occurs through cessation. When the soul stops constructing, the structure reveals itself. When the soul stops seeking, it finds itself already found. When the soul stops becoming, it realizes it always was. In alchemical terms, this is albedo, the whitening, the emergence of lunar consciousness, the appearance of subtle form after formlessness. In Kabbalistic terms, this is tikkun, the repair, the restoration of right relation between the levels of the soul. In Neoplatonic terms, this is epistrophe, the turning toward the source, the beginning of ascent. But reorientation is not arrival. It is threshold. The soul has not ascended. It has merely ceased descending. It has not attained enlightenment. It has merely glimpsed structure. It stands at the foot of the mountain, no longer falling, not yet climbing, but oriented. The ascent. The ascent is not dramatic. It is patient, methodical, incremental. It is the slow work of aligning consciousness with the structure disclosed in reorientation. It is the daily practice of distinguishing between the three fires, the disciplined refusal to allow one level to dominate the others. The body, Nefesh, is no longer denied, but integrated. Its demands are met without being obeyed. Its needs are honored without being granted sovereignty. The soul learns to inhabit the body without being imprisoned by it, to use it as an instrument without being used by it. The soul, Ruach, is no longer inflated but contained. Its passions are felt without being enacted. Its desires are acknowledged without being pursued. Its narratives are observed without being believed. The soul learns to witness the psyche without identifying with it, to allow emotions to arise and pass without attachment. The spirit, Neshamah, is no longer remote but accessible, not through ecstatic states or mystical raptures, but through the simple act of attention. The nous, always present, becomes perceptible when the noise of body and psyche subsides. It does not announce itself with thunder but with silence. The ascent is not linear. The soul does not climb steadily from one level to the next. It spirals, revisiting the same territory from different altitudes. Each return reveals what was invisible before. Each cycle deepens the alignment. The soul learns discernment, the capacity to identify which fire is burning at any given moment, which level of reality is governing perception, which world the consciousness currently inhabits. This discernment is not intellectual, but immediate, a direct knowing that precedes thought. The soul learns restraint, the capacity to refrain from premature expression, to hold the energy of realization without dissipating it through speech or action. Silence becomes not repression, but conservation, the preservation of inner fire. The soul learns responsibility, the recognition that alignment with the higher orders of being entails obligation. Not moral obligation imposed from without, but structural obligation arising from within. The soul that perceives principle becomes accountable to principle. The middle phase, the suspension between descent and ascent, the interval between disintegration and reformation, deserves particular scrutiny. This is the abyss, the void, the gap in which the soul hangs without support. This is where transformation either occurs or fails. The abyss is characterized by the complete absence of reference. The old structures have collapsed. The new structures have not yet emerged. The soul floats in undifferentiated potentiality, without form, without direction, without meaning. Time becomes strange. Causality loosens. The narratives that connected moments into continuity dissolve. Each moment stands alone, disconnected from what came before and what might come after. This is not depression, though someone in the abyss may meet diagnostic criteria for depression. Depression is the pathological collapse of meaning within a world that otherwise retains meaning. The abyss is the temporary suspension of the world itself. It is not that life feels meaningless, it is that the concept of meaning itself becomes unintelligible. This is not psychosis, though someone in the abyss may exhibit symptoms that resemble psychosis. Psychosis is the inability to distinguish between interior and exterior, between symbol and referent. The abyss is the recognition that this distinction was always provisional, that interior and exterior are themselves constructed categories, that the map is not the territory and never was. The abyss is teleological. It serves a function. Without the complete evacuation of former contents, the soul cannot receive new structure. Without the dissolution of false coherence, authentic coherence cannot emerge. The abyss is not obstacle but passage, not punishment but purification. The danger of the abyss is twofold. First, the soul may attempt to escape prematurely, grasping at any available structure to relieve the disorientation. This produces what might be called false reorientation, the adoption of new beliefs, new identities, new narratives that are no more authentic than the old ones. The soul, terrified of groundlessness, constructs a hasty ground. This is not transformation, but repetition. Second, the soul may remain in the abyss indefinitely, mistaking suspension for destination. This produces what might be called metaphysical nihilism, the conviction that there is no structure, that all is arbitrary, that meaning is impossible. The soul, enamored of its own dissolution, refuses reformation. This is not wisdom but stagnation. The abyss must be traversed, not inhabited. It is corridor, not chamber. The soul must pass through the void without denying it, without fleeing it, and without making a home in it. This requires trust, not faith in a deity or doctrine, but structural trust, the intuition that the process itself is coherent even when experience is not. The silence of the abyss is not empty silence. It is pregnant silence, the silence of germination, the silence of the seed in winter soil. Something is occurring beneath the surface of consciousness, a reorganization that cannot be perceived while it is happening. The soul, having released its grip on former structures, becomes permeable to structure that is not self-constructed. In Hermetic terms, this is the massa confusa, the chaotic prima materia from which the philosophical stone will eventually be extracted. In Kabbalistic terms, this is the shattering of the vessels, shevirat hakelim, the necessary breaking that precedes tikkun, the repair. In alchemical terms, this is the stage between nigredo and albedo, the nameless interval where transformation occurs in darkness. The soul in the abyss must cultivate what might be called negative capability, the capacity to remain in uncertainty without irritable reaching after fact and reason. It must learn to not know without despair, to not be without panic, to not mean without nihilism. This is the most difficult labor of the initiatic path, more difficult than any asceticism, more demanding than any discipline. Those who emerge from the abyss are changed, not because they acquired something but because they were emptied. They return not with answers but with structure, not with certainty but with orientation, not with knowledge but with capacity for knowledge. The formation of the inner temple is not construction, but crystallization. The structure does not arise from effort, but from cessation of effort. When the soul stops attempting to construct itself, it discovers itself already constructed according to principles it did not choose but can now recognize. Integration is not synthesis. It is not the blending of the three fires into a homogeneous unity. It is the establishment of right relation among distinct principles. Body, soul, and spirit remain distinct, but they cease to compete. Each operates within its proper sphere. Each respects the sovereignty of the others. The congress becomes harmonious, not through the elimination of difference, but through the coordination of difference. The integrated soul acts with restraint, not because it has suppressed desire, but because desire is no longer the sole governor of action. The body's impulses are acknowledged, but not obeyed. The psyche's narratives are observed but not enacted. The spirit's perceptions inform but do not dictate. Action arises from the coordination of all three levels, not from the dominance of any single level. The integrated soul speaks less, not because it has nothing to say, but because it recognizes the inadequacy of language to convey what is seen. The structure of consciousness is pre-linguistic. To speak of it is to reduce it. To explain it is to distort it. Silence becomes not evasion, but accuracy. The refusal to falsify through premature articulation. The integrated soul bears greater responsibility, not moral responsibility in the conventional sense, but ontological responsibility. The soul that perceives structure recognizes its position within structure. It sees that its actions ramify through levels of being beyond its perception. It becomes accountable not to external authority, but to the order of manifestation itself. The final state is not illumination. The integrated soul does not glow with supernatural radiance. It does not perform miracles. It does not attract followers. It simply inhabits itself with precision, acts with deliberation, and maintains coherence under pressure. This is what the traditions call adepthood, not superhuman capacity, but human capacity fully actualized. The inner temple, once formed, requires maintenance. The soul does not achieve integration and remain integrated effortlessly. The three fires constantly threaten to fall out of alignment. The body reasserts its demands. The psyche generates new illusions. The spirit becomes remote. The work is not accomplished once but renewed daily. The reascent, then, is not a journey with a terminus, but a direction maintained. The soul climbs not toward a peak, but toward greater altitude, not toward arrival, but toward continued ascent. There is no final enlightenment, only deeper alignment. There is no ultimate realization, only progressively more accurate perception. The transformed individual does not transcend the world, but inhabits it more fully, does not escape matter, but perceives the spirit within matter, does not deny the psyche but recognizes the psyche as intermediary between matter and spirit, does not abandon the body but treats the body as the temple of the soul, the vessel within which the three fires burn. This is not triumph. This is not achievement. This is simply what consciousness becomes when it stops resisting its own structure, when it ceases attempting to be other than what it is, when it aligns with the trinal order that governs all manifestation. What cannot be ordered within remains forever sundered from the order above.